Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. By then, Cassie and I had shared 10 years of life together. Half of that time as a married couple and the other half as a steady pair, almost inseparable from the start. Our bond felt timeless, as though we'd known each other for much longer than a decade. While I had a few relationships before Cassie, she'd only been involved with one other man, or so I believed. Our marriage was strong, progressing exactly as we had envisioned. Both of us had stable jobs, and we'd saved up enough to begin searching for our first home together. Starting a family would come next, as planned. My career in structural engineering was thriving, and Cassie had decided she would step back from her own job to stay home when the time came. She was as mesmerizing as she had been when we first met, chestnut hair grazing her shoulders and a fringe framing her dark, expressive eyes that sparkled when she laughed. Standing just 5'3", Cassie had a presence that felt much larger. Her figure was graceful, with a defined waist and strikingly proportioned hips. I, on the other hand, saw myself as rather average, nothing particularly remarkable. Just under 6 feet, under 200 pounds, my only real physical bragging right was my thick head of hair, still untouched by time. Running a few times a week kept me fit. Our intimacy was deeply fulfilling. We were open about our desires, making sure we both felt comfortable and content. To me, life felt secure and promising. We had settled into a comfortable rhythm, one that even extended to our evenings. At night, we either drifted off to sleep or enjoyed quiet moments together. We rarely stayed up talking in the dark, and that routine seemed to work for us. In hindsight, I see why it felt like a stabilizing habit. But one night, Cassie broke that routine. "John, can we talk?" she asked softly, catching me off guard. "What is it? Can't it wait until morning?" I replied, barely concealing my surprise. After a pause, she went on. "John, Clayton Brenner is in town for a few days. Would you mind if I met him while he's here?" The name jolted me. Clayton Brenner, her only other boyfriend. Back in school, he was the stereotypical heartthrob. He came from a wealthy family, always dressed to impress, and drove a sleek car that turned heads, while the rest of us were scraping by with our old, battered vehicles. Girls were drawn to him, and he went through relationships like clockwork, each girl lasting only a few weeks. They all knew his reputation, but convinced themselves they'd be the exception. Cassie had once been one of those girls, caught up in his charm until he eventually moved on. He bragged openly about his conquests, and while some of us were unimpressed, others admired him. Rumor had it he was exceptionally skilled in bed, and none of his exes, including Cassie, seemed to hold anything against him. "Why are you asking me now?" I said, irritation clear in my voice. "I don't want to do anything that would make you uncomfortable," she answered cautiously. "Where would you be meeting him?" "At the restaurant in Desca," she replied quietly. "Cassie, I really don't like him," I told her, my tone firm. "I know, but we were friends back in school," she said defensively. I took a long breath. "Cassie, he wasn't your friend. He treated you like a mark on a checklist." She didn't reply, and a heavy silence filled the room. "When did he reach out to you?" I finally asked. "Yesterday." "Then why wait until now to tell me?" I could sense her hesitation as she stayed quiet for several seconds. Finally, I sighed, choosing not to press further. "I'm done talking about this. You decide. Do what you think is right." I turned away from her, hoping that would end the conversation. A while later, I heard her soft, stifled sobs, muffled against her pillow. I was shocked. Cassie had never cried like that before. I lay still, pretending to sleep, but her quiet weeping persisted, lingering in the silence until she eventually drifted off. That night seemed to last forever. Why was she crying because I didn't want her to meet an old boyfriend? Why wait a full day before telling me he'd contacted her? And why did he even reach out to her after all this time? Those questions gnawed at me in the dark, and that night became one I'll never forget. Our conversation had been brief, lacking the depth to stir any real emotion from her, no tears or confessions. It felt like something vital had slipped away from me, an elusive truth just beyond my grasp. I spent the entire night awake, wrestling with the haunting feeling that I had missed something crucial. There was, in fact, a clear solution. I just had to ask her. Had she met him already? What drew her in? Was she considering being with him, or had it already happened? These questions looped through my mind relentlessly, nearly driving me to the edge, but I understood that asking directly was not an option. I needed her to offer the truth on her own, without any pressure from me. I felt this principle deeply. I wouldn't take shortcuts. If she decided to tell me, fine, but I wouldn't push. When I glanced at the clock, it was nearly 5 a.m. I slipped quietly out of bed and made my way to the bathroom, careful not to disturb her. Still, my thoughts kept spinning. I tried distracting myself with small mental exercises, but nothing worked to quiet my mind. Before leaving the bathroom, I noticed the laundry basket. I lifted the lid slowly, peering inside. Shifting a few items on top, I uncovered a pair of black silk panties and a matching black push-up bra. This was her special lingerie, reserved for occasions worth celebrating: birthdays, anniversaries, memorable nights. This type of lingerie usually hinted at a special evening. Yesterday hadn't been a special day for us. There hadn't been any shared moment worth celebrating. I hadn't even seen her in this set. That left only one unsettling possibility. Gently, I brought her panties up to my face. There was no scent, no hint of intimacy clinging to them. For a brief moment, I exhaled in relief, but I quickly reminded myself that this didn't necessarily mean nothing had happened. All I knew was that she had worn her black silk lingerie yesterday, perhaps for someone else to appreciate. I carefully set them back on the vanity, moving silently as I dressed, and left the house. The Waffle House was open all night. I sat there staring at my third cup of coffee, while my mind raced uncontrollably. I couldn't even finish my half-eaten plate of eggs and oatmeal. After paying, I still felt lost, no clearer about my next step. A storm of emotions whirled within me. Disappointment over her betrayal hit first. But soon, a fierce desire for revenge started to brew. Clayton Brenner had crossed a line when he reached out to my wife. He was a smooth talker, a charming manipulator, and the idea of him inserting himself into my marriage felt like an insult. A woman never forgets her first love, and with Clayton's wealth and good looks, it made the whole thing even harder to swallow. But turning my anger on Cassie felt different. I understood what Clayton wanted, but with Cassie, her intentions were less clear. Her choices mattered to me. If she had done something, I needed to know why, to understand what she had hoped to accomplish. I couldn't judge her without more understanding, and yet, a part of me was terrified to discover the truth. I drove around town aimlessly, waiting for the day to begin. By the time I reached the office, I had half convinced myself that I didn't want to know what Cassie had or hadn't done. The truth might be a wrecking ball to our marriage, one that couldn't be avoided. I decided I wouldn't demand an explanation from her, no matter how tempted I might be, if she even wanted to give one. I felt weary, nearly defeated, with no real drive to work or do anything else. By this time, Cassie would be awake, and she would have seen the lingerie on the vanity. I tried to imagine her reaction, but my own mind was too muddled to even speculate on her thoughts. She knew now that I had noticed something was wrong. I couldn't focus on my tasks at the office. Then, at around 10 a.m., my phone rang. It was John. Cassie's voice was faint and tremulous on the other end of the line. "It's me," she murmured, sounding uncertain. There was a pause. "I'll be staying with my mom for a few days. Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to mask my concern. "Yes," she answered, her voice faltering. "Just a few days, maybe a week. Is that okay?" "Of course. Call when you're ready to come home." "Thank you." A silence hung between us. Then, "John, I love you." But I couldn't bring myself to reply. I ended the call, set my phone aside, and sank into my office chair, overcome by a swell of emotion. For the first time in years, I felt tears slipping down my cheeks, silent and weighty. I decided to take the rest of the week off, using some accumulated sick days. Part of me sensed I was about to do something reckless, though I couldn't quite place what that would be. In my mind, an agonizing scene unfolded. Cassie, meeting up with Clayton at a motel, dining together, following him to his room, rekindling the intimacy they'd once shared. Guilt-ridden, she had tried to confess one night in bed, choosing a quiet moment she'd hoped might elicit understanding from me. But I hadn't offered her any grace. I'd left her to grapple with her conscience alone, and now she was ensnared in her own deception, unsure how to go forward. Of course, it was possible I was wrong. When I'd come home that evening, I'd found her black lingerie tossed carelessly into the trash in the garage. The following days dragged by, each darker than the one before. I spent my time secluded at home, replaying these agonizing scenes over and over. Once our relationship had felt so strong, so unshakable. I longed to hold on to that bond, but just the thought of confronting her shattered any remaining trust between us. Any admission from her would end us, just as any questioning from me would cast a permanent shadow over us. I felt trapped. I imagined Cassie was on the verge of confessing, ready to deal with whatever fallout would come. But I no longer wanted to hear it. Her admission, I believed, would destroy our marriage. She didn't seem to realize the weight of it all. Did she see herself as a betrayer now? Someone who'd made one disastrous mistake? And then there was Clayton, a man who preyed on married women, feeding off his past triumphs to tempt them back. He had breached my life, calling Cassie to lure her away. I felt my anger harden, directed solely at him. I decided to confront him the next day, no matter what might happen. It wasn't hard to find where Clayton was staying. My plan was simple: knock on his door, wait for him to open it, and settle things then and there. I didn't care about the consequences. I envisioned a quick, quiet confrontation that wouldn't draw attention. For the task, I picked my .22 Ruger. The plan was 3 shots to the chest, 1 to the head. I'd never been much of a gun person. I could barely remember the last time I'd even held or cleaned any of them. My modest collection included a shotgun, a hunting rifle, a .38 revolver, and my Ruger. But the Ruger was nowhere to be found. I searched high and low, even racked my brain to remember if I'd loaned it to someone, but nothing came to mind. So I grabbed my Smith & Wesson instead and drove to the Deska Inn, committed to my plan. When I arrived, things didn't go as expected. The motel was surrounded by police cars. I quickly shoved the gun under the seat, got out of the car, and strolled toward an officer, keeping my demeanor calm. Several officers were escorting a woman from Clayton's room, draping a blanket over her shoulders, while another officer guided her gently. My heart pounded as I anticipated seeing Cassie. But as the woman came closer, I recognized her, Susan Bradford, an old high school acquaintance. She and her husband Barry had moved away a few years ago for his car dealership business. A mix of relief and sadness washed over me. It wasn't Cassie, but Susan's evident distress cut through me just the same. Once, Susan had been one of Clayton's old flames. As the officers led her to the patrol car, I overheard one of them explaining, "She locked herself in the bathroom. It took some effort to get her out." Word was, Clayton had been brought down with a .22 Ruger. Shortly afterward, his body was zipped into a bag and taken away. Honestly, I didn't feel much sorrow. I'd always imagined that I'd be the one to take him down. But life rarely unfolds the way we hope. On my way home, I picked up a pizza and a 6-pack, then spent the rest of the week lost in yard work and small house repairs. Work could wait. I wasn't in the mood, and with Clayton's drama now behind me, a dull sense of letdown began to settle over me. I kept a newspaper clipping detailing the circumstances of Clayton's end. The case was stagnant, no leads, no witnesses. When Cassie returned, the house was clean, and a simple dinner was set out. I welcomed her with a small smile and a light kiss. We sat down to eat, catching up on her parents, steering clear of anything even remotely controversial. After we finished, I did the dishes and brought her a cup of Earl Grey. She sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, until she finally lifted her gaze. "John, there's something I need to tell you." "Cassie, not tonight," I replied. "It's been a long week and I'm not up for this." But she persisted gently. "Just listen." "Drink your tea," I said. Silence hung heavily between us. I handed her the article about Clayton and watched as she read it, her expression searching for some hint of my reaction, but I remained quiet. "I think I'll take a shower and get to bed early. I haven't been sleeping well. I'll crash on the couch tonight. Good night. Good night, John, she said softly. I watched her go upstairs, then took our cups to the sink. It felt like we had a long way to go before things would feel right again. 2 weeks later, I moved back into the bedroom. 6 weeks after that, we were close again. 4 months passed before we felt like ourselves. Though some things had permanently shifted, we found a new rhythm. Late-night talks faded, and we never mentioned Clayton again. Eventually, Cassie found out she was pregnant. We were thrilled. With a baby on the way, a station wagon seemed practical. I went to Barry Bradford, who happened to be going through a divorce with Susan. He shared the details without holding back. I made a casual remark. Too bad she locked herself in the bathroom and couldn't identify the shooter. Rugers are quiet, I added, but she must have heard it. Barry looked at me oddly. I scrambled mentally, wondering what I'd said wrong. Up to this point, our conversation had been easygoing and I couldn't imagine what had set off his reaction. Finally, he said, John, none of the news reports or articles mentioned she was in the bathroom. I fumbled. I must have read it somewhere, I replied, hoping to smooth things over. I couldn't admit I'd been there when it happened. Barry's gaze didn't waver. I've read everything about Clayton's death. Nowhere did they disclose that a .22 Ruger was involved. The police kept that information private for the investigation. I stumbled over my response. I don't know. Maybe I heard it somewhere, I said, brushing it off. Barry continued to study me, remaining silent. He was aware of Cassie's past with Clayton. Everyone knew. Clayton had made a habit of flaunting his conquests. Then Barry's mouth curled into a knowing grin. John, I'm about to give you the best deal on the nicest station wagon on the lot. Let's pick one out, Barry said confidently, as though he'd solved the mystery of how I knew Susan was in the bathroom. He was wrong, but I didn't feel the need to correct him. In time, Barry opened his own Ford dealership, which means I now get a nice discount on a new car every 2 years, a lifetime perk. Cassie and I have built a joyful life with our 2 wonderful daughters. Our marriage only grew stronger over the years, with only a few minor bumps along the way. At social gatherings, Cassie had a habit of staying close by. Whenever a bold guy tried his luck with her, she'd make her way over to me, slip her hand in mine, and whisper, "It's time to go." I always knew what she meant. This happened often, as Cassie had developed into a striking woman with an undeniable charm. She was aging gracefully, and it hadn't gone unnoticed. Friends would chuckle about her ritual. Whenever we left early, they'd speculate on who had flirted with Cassie and joke about having words with him later. It turned into a lighthearted game among our group. Our 20th high school reunion was held in Lancaster. Reunions are predictable events, handshakes, small talk, and reminiscing. The night was going smoothly, and we were having a good time. As the evening wound down, a poised, elegant woman approached our table. It was Janet Brenner, Clayton's widow. She extended her hand and asked if I'd like to dance. I looked to Cassie, who nodded her approval. Janet and I shared a slow dance, and I made sure to keep my emotions in check. When the song ended, we lingered on the dance floor, and Janet held my hands in hers. Clayton had an electronic planner, she said. After the police returned Clayton's belongings, the planner was still powered on. The authorities hadn't examined it, so she read it cover to cover, over and over, until she finally destroyed it. She said she'd been waiting for this moment to thank me for making her last 12 years so fulfilling. Her new husband was the best thing that had ever happened to her, and she believed that wouldn't have been possible without me. Though I understood what she was implying, I knew she had it wrong. But I didn't see any harm in letting her believe it. I kept my face expressionless, letting her share her thoughts. Though I wasn't sure what she'd found in Clayton's planner, she seemed convinced I'd been her liberator. She leaned in and placed a soft kiss on my cheek. As I glanced back, I saw Cassie watching us closely. I escorted Janet back to her table, where a tall, imposing man stood up to greet her. "John, this is my husband, Harold Stanton. Harold, meet John Wagner." Harold shook my hand with a grip that turned my knuckles white. "John, it's a pleasure to finally meet you." "We both appreciate everything you've done," Harold said, his gaze penetrating. I managed a response, hoping my tone sounded genuine. I'm glad to hear things worked out for you both. Here's to many more happy years together. It sounded a bit hollow, but I was at a loss for words. I gave a polite nod and returned to our table, where I found Cassie sitting quietly, her head bowed, her fingers fidgeting nervously on her lap. It was a familiar gesture of hers whenever she was tense. I took my seat and she started to speak. I brought my hand to my lips, brushing my fingers across them, and she just smiled and fell silent. We were both tired, facing a 2-hour drive back to Reading. We chatted about the reunion on the way home, but didn't bring up Janet. Once we were back, we checked on the kids and headed to bed. I turned off the light and gave Cassie a gentle kiss on her cheek. In the stillness, I sensed she was awake beside me. John. Yes? What did Janet say to you? She mentioned how happy she and her husband are and wanted me to thank you on her behalf. It was a lie. Silence filled the room, and Cassie lay beside me, perfectly still, her breath barely audible. Cassie? Yes? Where exactly did you put my Ruger? Good night, John. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.